there, and welcome to today's edition of GP Notebook Podcasts. I'm Dr James Waldron, a portfolio GP based in Nottingham. I'm a GP educator, podcaster and co-host of the GP Notebook study groups. Join us for a whole range of bite-sized topics tailored for those in primary care, perfect for your morning commute or anytime and anywhere. You can tune into us on all leading podcast platforms, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And if you enjoy what you hear, please consider leaving a review. You can stay connected with us on X at GP Notebook for podcast updates and much more. You can also find me at Jammiest Dodgers. Lastly, check out the new GP Notebook website for show notes and additional resources. Discover opportunities to join study groups and access a wealth of educational materials. So today I will be speaking to Dr Naomi Fox, a paediatric occupational therapist, about improving care and consultations for children with additional needs and supporting their families too. Welcome, Naomi. It's wonderful to have you on the programme today. Really glad that you could join us.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Oh, it's great to have you. Well, so I think best place for us to start, tell us a bit about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name's Naomi. I'm a children's occupational therapist by training. So I'm sure you guys are all very aware of what OTs do, but I look at all the things kids do every day, whether that's washing, dressing, eating, playing, writing, concentrating, see if there's anything they find difficult, why they might find it difficult, and how I can help make it easier. I'm the founder and CEO of a charity called Growing Hope. We champion accessibility and provide free therapy for children and young people with additional needs in partnership with churches across the UK. And I've done a PhD in the experience of play for children with high levels of physical disability due to cerebral palsy. So that's something that also informs my practice.
Wonderful. It's really great to hear. We were talking a bit before about your PhD and play, and I thought that might be a really nice place to start. Why is play so important when it comes to occupational therapy and children development?
Yeah, totally. Play is a primary occupation for children. So, we know that UNICEF writes for the child, play is a right for all children. I've actually recently worked with the Royal College of OT to develop a play guideline alongside the kind of using the NICE guideline framework with some other occupational therapists and the Royal College. And that guideline is available for people to be able to use and talks about how important play is as a primary occupation for children. And we know that actually play improves children's health and well-being, and it also is a tool that we can use to enable children to engage in therapy. So I often say to people, I get to play all day as an OT. Like when I'm in my sessions, it will look like I'm just playing with the children that I'm engaging with. But actually what I'm doing is building in lots of therapeutic tools and, working towards the therapy goals as part of that play.
Yeah, well, I think that speaks to me a bit as a GP as well. And I think that a good consultation with a child often involves a little bit of that back and forth, a little bit of joking, a little bit of turning the examination into play, because they often engage really well with that. So yeah, hopefully that's a thing that other people might be able to take into their practice too.
Yeah, totally. It's such a good question to ask yourself, like, oh, what could I do actually to make this like a little bit more fun for this child in front of me? Because anything can be a play object for a child and anything can enable them to engage more. And we know that because play does improve health and well-being, it also is going to help a child feel more calm, and you're going to be able to build more rapport if you enable a more playful interaction with those you see in your clinics.
And hopefully get them to come back to the GP when they need to later in life and not remember it as a horrible experience.
Exactly, yeah.
So Growing Hope sounds like a wonderful thing. How did that get started? What was that in response to?
Yeah, it is in response to the fact that there's just so much need at the moment in terms of children with additional needs and the amount of support that they have. So I actually had been working in the NHS, and then I worked a bit in private practice. Whilst I was working in private practice, I had a family who had bailiffs knocking on their door, and they still came and paid for therapy because they needed support. And there's just such a level of desperation. I'm sure as GPs, those listening have seen that in a lot of the families that have come to the consultation in clinics. And we exist essentially to bridge that gap. So we bring hope to children through providing free therapy for children with additional needs. We grow hope for families where hope has been lost through isolation or rejection. And we share hope in Jesus because we're a Christian charity and we believe that he brings hope even in the most difficult situations. But our services are open to all individuals, regardless of their faith or background, and there's absolutely no pressure to pray if families don't want to.
Well, that's great. And I think it's nice to have organisations help galvanise communities and groups of people to do wonderful things. A couple of things I wanted to pick up there, just to sort of clarify. We talk about additional needs, and I think that's a term that comes up in general practice really frequently. What do we actually mean by additional needs in this context?
We look at additional needs as Growing Hope. We look at additional needs as being really wide ranging. So a learning need, a physical need, a mental health need, an undiagnosed need, anything which is impacting on a child or young person's ability to engage in day-to-day activity. We frame that as an additional need. And when we're in a clinic setting, we're setting up therapy sessions for children. We have a model of giving 6 weeks of therapy intervention where we have our Growing Hope clinics. And we're always looking at 3 functional goals with those children. So we're looking at, where is then that child's needs impacting their day-to-day life, and how can we support them in that? Because we know that 1 in 6 children in the education system have additional needs at the moment, and that number increases every year. So every year we write our annual reports and look back at the government stats, and it's shocking how much is increasing. And anecdotally, families are saying they've got 1 to 2 year wait for therapy services. I'm sure that is repeated. I know that is repeated across the country, and we really aim to try and bridge that gap in intervention support for families.
And that feels particularly vital at present because, as you say, additional needs are increasing, but it doesn't feel like funding and services are necessarily keeping pace with that. And that's going to be an ongoing issue for families and children who their early experiences are going to shape the rest of their life.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's research post-COVID about the impact that both COVID and then, COVID impact waiting lists, that also impact children's function generally, and families have reported like a significant reduction in service provision. So yeah, there's a massive need there.
Yeah. And I think COVID has evidently had a massive impact on all services, NHS and in the charity sector as well. The isolation that people went through during that, and I think afterwards while they're waiting for a diagnosis, has, I think, really impacted on our ability to support people.
Absolutely. I think the National Autistic Society did a brilliant report after COVID about families' experiences of COVID who had children with autism or were supporting individuals with autism. And there was a significant number of individuals who had to give up work during that period because of the level of care needs that their children, young people, or individuals they were supporting had. And that's something that we see right across the board. Again, there's lots of research which talks about that, how families end up having to give up work to care for their children. They're then more isolated because they're not even in their work setting. We have families come to us in clinic and we ask them, about who's in their support network, who they've got, who they can turn to. And they say, oh no, well, I don't have any support. There's nobody I can turn to. I don't know who to tell about this problem. And we know that mental health needs are significantly higher for parents and carers, and also brothers and sisters of children with additional needs, because of that level of isolation. I think anecdotally, when we talk to siblings, we see them talk about, actually we can't go to the park because mummy can't take my brother to the park, so we just stay at home. Those kind of things have a massive impact on families.
Yeah, and I think recognising that providing care and providing occupational therapy care to people with additional needs is going to be quite different. How do you, in Growing Hope and as a children's occupational therapist, approach that challenge?
We want to make sure that our service is really family focused. So like Growing Hope for families where hope's been lost through isolation or rejection is part of our aim. So in our clinics, they're multidisciplinary clinics. So we've got OTs, physios, speech therapists, music therapists, counsellors, and all of our therapists we train to make sure that they take time to ask parents, learn parents' names, ask parents how they are, like genuinely ask parents how they are. Our therapists have work phones, and that means that families can ask us quick questions if they want to. I think those kind of things make a really big difference to families. One of our values at Growing Hope is around community and wanting everyone to be seen, heard, and able to belong. And we just want to approach the way that we do therapy with that lens of like wanting people to be seen and heard. And I think there's so many simple, practical things we can do as healthcare professionals to make that happen, like stuff like learning people's names, stuff like taking, the 2 seconds to ask someone how they are, like even when our appointments are really squeezed, like even if we have to cut them slightly short, like giving them a moment to just say how they're doing, and then active listening, like reflecting back to them, gosh, like that sounds like you've had a really hard week and you're feeling really emotional. Like often that can make a really big difference to families because they don't have anyone who's hearing them and how they're doing in terms of where they're at.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Family-focused support is core to general practice, but of course, trying to find the time to do that is always a challenge for us, but vitally important, of course. Increasing risks of mental health problems in parents and family members with children with additional needs, and of course, it didn't really occur to me the idea of just going to the park. If you've got a child with physical needs, that might be very, very difficult. And so there's the impact on the siblings as well, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we see a lot of impact in terms of behaviour as well. So I'm sure you see in your clinics, like lots of families who haven't yet had a diagnosis, potentially don't yet even know that their child has additional needs, but they're experiencing high levels of challenging behaviour. That is a massive need. I see a lot of children who have lots of different challenging behaviour, might not be sleeping, might not be able to be in the community because of safety, and that can have a really difficult, kind of outcome for families, because then again, they often want to hide rather than be in places, because people, when they see them, look at them and say, oh gosh, your child's being naughty. And when they're on a 2-year waiting list for a diagnosis, they don't then even have something to be like, oh, can we, this is why my child is finding this situation difficult. And I think that can be particularly challenging. I think as well, I'm sure you will see lots of families who have English as a second language, don't potentially understand the full system within the UK, don't understand, how much fight they have to give in order to get the support that their children need. I think that's a really big challenge that we see a lot at Growing Hope, is we see families where they don't know how to advocate for their children, or they don't know that that's something that they need to do. And there's really brilliant resources out there that can help families. So every locality often has, it's either called a kind of parent service or Sendias, or there are lots of different names for it, but kind of a parent-led service that supports parents of children and young people with additional needs, that can help champion those families. And often that's around the educational healthcare system and healthcare plans that enable children to get support in school, but it can be around other support as well, and enabling signposting families to that can be really helpful.
Yeah, I think that comes back again to community, doesn't it? Because if you're unaware of the steps that you need to take to get your child, additional support at school, or which schools might be the best or most appropriate for, is really difficult if you're not plugged into that. And so it's really nice that community is at the focus of Growing Hope and of, I suppose, young person support in general.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the GPs play a really key role, particularly also in helping families sometimes realise when they do need support. And often when I'm doing training, actually, people say to me, ask me questions around like, yeah, but like how, and you guys do that all the time, but how can we talk to the families about what we've noticed in a child or in a young person that indicates that they may actually have some challenges? And I often talk to families about the specific things that I observe. So, I've seen that actually he's finding it really hard to sit still, and he's not been able to sit still in this 10 minutes. I wonder if actually that might show us that there's something a bit more going on here, and maybe we should make a referral to paediatricians, to community paediatrics, to have a look at what that might be. And I think that can make a big difference for families, particularly I think particularly post-COVID as well, I've seen a lot of families where they've been afraid of nursery or haven't quite done nursery, particularly first children, where they don't have any idea of developmental milestones, and therefore they haven't realised the significant level of needs that their child has. And I think that's also a role that GPs can play. Like if you're seeing children and they may not have had much contact with services, and you may notice actually, this child's 2 and they've got very limited language, or they're really struggling to do, their day-to-day things. Let's look at that as some red flags and have a conversation with the family about that.
Yeah, I think it's really helpful to know. I think there's the 2 things I sort of pick out for there. You've got the one, the patient unmet need, which is they've been referred and now it's a 2-year wait, and now what? And what support can we offer in the meantime? And on the other hand, actually families where they might not recognise that there are additional needs that might need to be approached in a different way. And I think, again, further exacerbating health inequalities, there is fewer resources often available to people who are struggling in those situations. So, I mean, you mentioned a couple of little things there that we can pick out on, noticing in our consultations, even if that isn't the focus of what we're doing. What can we as GPs do better to identify earlier, understand more fully about the experiences for patients with additional needs and their families?
I think one of the things that comes up quite a lot for families that we see through Growing Hope is this experience of grief. So this often comes as a bit of a, interesting concept. It might not be something that you've come across before, but actually for families, when they have a child who has additional needs, what that means is their hopes and dreams for their child have often changed. They will have had hopes and dreams for their child potentially without having extra needs, and suddenly they've got all of these extra needs that they need to think about. So I think having an awareness that actually families might be going through an experience of grief can be really important. So we know, there's lots of different grief cycles out there, but we know that grief can include feelings of depression and anxiety, but also feelings of denial, feelings of anger, bargaining, like trying to work it out before you get to this period of acceptance. And actually often it's not this linear cycle, it's this kind of changing cycle where you don't quite know what families are going to experience at any time. And I think sometimes as healthcare professionals we see the hard side of that, in that families might be quite angry with us, and actually that part of that is just them letting some of their grief out. I think families often don't know what they need to say to a GP to get a referral, to get the referral that they need. So, and then that can make it difficult to know which service to signpost families to. So I think the key things that can help are focusing on function and behaviour and the impact of that. So really looking at, okay, what are the specific day-to-day things that this child and family are struggling with? And asking those questions if families haven't told you. So saying, what about sleeping? What about bedtime? What about getting them in the bath? What about meal times? And in all of that, you might find out, for example, a child with autism might not be sleeping, might be waking for hours and hours in the night. They might not be able to eat very much. They might have a very limited diet. They might have very challenging behaviour around bath time, or they might not be brushing their teeth. They might be screaming every time the shower turns on because of sensory needs. So asking the questions can help, and making sure you're mentioning social skills and the most challenging behaviours when you're talking, like making referrals, because they're going to be kind of key things that referrers are looking for. Noticing for flags or patterns, so things like frequent meltdowns, the fact that they might be non-verbal, or sensory things, so loud noises, dogs barking, hearing the hand dryer. They're very common challenges, and that can make a big difference.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful to understand, to start noticing these things. And I think once you're aware of the signs to look out for, it can really enhance your consultation. Are there any practical tips you can give us for sort of conducting consultations? We talked about play a little bit earlier. are there any specific things that we might be able to bring in as little, I suppose, little hacks to improve that communication with the children and the family?
Yeah, totally. I think using visuals can be really, really helpful, and also using movements. So visual symbols, you've probably seen them, around. There's brilliant software and things online, like Widget Online are really good, and they're universal symbols. So for individuals with learning disabilities, symbols are often used as a way of giving a picture and a word to help with communication. We know that in terms of communication and understanding, seeing a picture of something, actually seeing a photo first and foremost, but then a symbol and a coloured symbol and then a black and white symbol will enable understanding. So if you have a photo or if you have a symbol of what you're doing, that might help children to be able to engage more easily and help with understanding. And, I find that I use visuals and symbols in all of my sessions, and it really helps communication with the whole family. Everyone has a clear outline of what's happening. And in a GP consultation, that might be, we're going to play with my cars, we're going to have a chat, I'm going to use my stethoscope, and then, we're finished, or whatever it is. I mean, it obviously will depend on what that family needs, but that can make a really big difference for a child being able to engage. And then using movement as an occupational therapist, I love talking and thinking about proprioception, body awareness, how we enable our bodies to receive the sensory input that we need to be able to feel more calm and regulated. And we know as a kind of, overarching principle that the more movement that we do that puts pressure to our joints, the more regulated we are. So giving a child something to fidget with, like having a car or a tangle, even for adults as well, some pipe cleaners, like something someone can hold in their hands, like actually we know that is going to help them feel more calm and able to engage. And even more so, like we know that proprioception, kind of actual heavy work movement, like a child sitting on a gym ball or doing some star jumps, that actually helps with speech centers. So if you're having a conversation with a child who's a bit more able, like doing some movement stuff might help them to be able to answer your questions more easily.
Wonderful. That's really fascinating. And I'm very happy to say we're going to explore that in a little bit more detail in the second part of our podcast, which I'm really looking forward to. So I think as we approach the end of today's talk, I was wondering, apart from, including Growing Hope, what sort of resources can we as practitioners use or parents access to help them along this journey?
Yeah, so there are really brilliant videos out there. So the National Autistic Society, who I mentioned earlier, they've got a video called Can You Make It to the End, which is all about what it feels like to have sensory overload, essentially. That's a really helpful one for you guys to watch, like to give you more understanding. But I think there's lots of brilliant charities, so National Autistic Society, and then there's always specific charities to each of the different additional needs that children and families might come across with. I think it's important to think about mental health support. So what groups and services do you have in your local area, particularly those both provided by the charity sector as well as those you can refer to, but like particularly knowing waiting lists are long, thinking about what's more readily accessible. And at Growing Hope, we've got parent courses that we provide. And we also at Growing Hope, we offer free parent training on Zoom and podcasts and support for families. So growinghope.org.uk/parent training gives all the different links to the Zoom sessions that we have. And they look at a whole wide range of additional needs and occupational therapy, speech therapy, counselling, wide range of strategies for families. And then you can signpost, we mentioned Sendias, so those kind of local parent support groups, you can signpost to those and tell parents about EHCPs early. Families often don't know about education healthcare plans, and as GPs you probably don't know the whole picture of them either, but actually like talking to families about the fact that if their child has significant additional needs, there is support available, and they need to start talking to their child's nursery or school about how they make sure that they get that support in place, because that can make a big difference to families.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Naomi, for talking to us today. It's been really fascinating exploring this world. And I'm really glad that we've got a second part of this talk coming up. So hopefully everybody at home has enjoyed listening today and you've learned a few little nuggets of information. As always, all of the links to the resources we've mentioned will be in the podcast notes. But thank you very much, Naomi.
No problem at all. A pleasure to speak to you.
And we look forward to speaking to you again really soon. Thank you.
So thank you all for tuning in. We trust you found this podcast valuable. For additional information and links related to the episode, visit GPnotebookpodcast.com. If you found this episode enjoyable, remember to hit that follow button and perhaps leave a like and a review. Connect with us on social media at GP Notebook or drop us an email if you have any questions, feedbacks or suggestions for future episodes. Help us shape this. Visit our revamped website to find out more about GP Notebook Pro, to enrol in our virtual GP Notebook study groups and access resources and tips aimed at enhancing patient care in primary care. See you next time.